Between Ghostbusters, the original film, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, science fiction apparently just has a thing for marshmallows. Look, all right, I sat here for 5 minutes trying to come up with a better joke than that wasn't something wrote like, who you gonna call? Ghostbusters. But I couldn't come up with anything, so at the very least, that's an original Jessie gender joke for you there. But, bad jokes kind of fits this film because there are a lot of intentionally bad jokes in this movie. Not that the movie's bad jokes, but there are actually bad jokes in this film because I'm going to be talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife, the latest Ghostbusters movie. See how I brought it all back. I transitioned well, and then I ruined it by pointing it out just now. But regardless, as I'm sure with many of you out there, I loved the original Ghostbusters movies. Like, I still have the DVDs that I had since I was a little kid of Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2 that I watched to death. I even loved Ghostbusters 2, even though I realized that as an adult that is not a particularly good film. As a kid, I have no sense of taste. It was just more fun with the Ghostbuster crew that I knew and loved. So I just really adored both of those films. And also, on top of that, the 2016 reboot movie, I was not a fan of, not for the reasons that everyone else hated on that movie, like, oh, look, they added women to it. But overall, I feel like it was a movie that was more ruined by the fact that Paul Feig, the director, is very much more about improv, and Ghostbusters has always been a much more tightly scripted and tightly structured type of film series. And so for a film to just go full improv, I feel like it just needed a tighter edit, and it ultimately felt a little bit formless. There were good elements of it, like Chris Hemsworth and Kate McKinnon were both fantastic in that movie, but other than that, it was ultimately kind of a bloated, unstructured mess. So I was coming into Ghostbusters Afterlife with kind of hopeful optimism, because this movie was going to be directed by Jason Reitman, the son of Ivan Reitman, who directed the first two Ghostbusters movies, and Jason Reitman on his own, I think, is a fantastic director. So I hoped that he would come into this movie sort of with a sense of reverence and love for what came before, but also bring his own perspective and unique take on it, and not just do a member berries type of story. And ultimately, in the day, I think this film, in a weird way, both succeeded and failed in equal measure to kind of make for me, kind of a mixed bag of a movie overall, but one that I am ultimately mostly positive on. And so this movie ends up being a little bit hard to talk about, but I think I want to address first that argument that people have been sort of complaining about with this film of fan service. I've seen two sides of this argument, that some people feel that it is overly fan servicey, like here's the member berries of like, here's the Ghostbusters vehicle, here's the Ghostbusters traps that we've seen, here's some familiar looking ghosts and familiar looking events and characters and things like that. And then I've seen other people on the other side of the argument say that this movie is a loving evocation of the Ghostbusters mythos. It is a wonderful send-off of Harold Ramis as well, who passed away and who appears kind of sort of in this movie as sort of like a specter, no pun intended, over the film in terms of his character instigating events, but obviously not being directly involved in them, with his character Egon's death being sort of the inciting incident of the film. And I see both sides of the argument, and I honestly kind of fall right in the middle, where I feel like this film does have moments throughout it that I feel are just loving evocations of Ghostbusters in a way that feels kind of nice and warm and comforting, and also kind of natural to the plot. Like, for example, when characters find the original, like, Ecto-1, or when they find the, the ghost traps and learn what they are, and they're all kind of excited about that, and there's, like, these moments of, like, Paul Rudd's character being like, that's an original Ghostbusters trap, and him, like, knowing all about the 1980s and all the things that went on with Ghostbusters originally. It was just cool to see, and I liked those moments quite a bit, because they kind of fit naturally the plot, because we have these kid characters sort of discovering the world, and then we have characters like Paul Rudd sort of being like, oh yeah, this is cool, I get to see all the Ghostbusters stuff. And so it's sort of like for new and old audiences alike to kind of find joy in these moments. And on that front, I think that that's really excellent. But then there's the other half of this film in terms of the plot of it, and I feel like the plot of this movie, especially towards the end, really just kind of gets a little bit too into just repeating the same beats of the original Ghostbusters film. I mean, it's kind of hinted at in the trailers. I'm going to go full spoilers into here, but the ultimate big bad of this movie is Gozer the Gozerian again. And towards the end of the film, there are so many moments that are just literally repetitious of that beat. Like, we have the two dog monster things, the gatekeeper and the keymaster, getting together, Paul Rudd's character and the mom character sort of taking on those roles that were that Sigourney Weaver took on in the original film, to the point where, like, Gozer literally asks, are you a god? It's so repetitious of those exact same beats that I was just getting a little bit frustrated at it at those moments. And then we also get like a Gozer ghost that's not exactly like Slimer, but like sort of a big, like fat-eating ghost that we see throughout the film. And it's Slimer-like, and I was sort of like, this is the same type of ghost. Even though I do think that that ghost is ultimately used for an interesting little Chekhov's gun down the line, it is a little bit repetitious in that sense. And so I kind of sit in the middle ground of it, and that the moments that I feel like really hit hard for me are some of the callbacks to old Ghostbusters in a way that really hones in from the emotionality of the characters involved, but also their plot of it does tend to a little bit too much lean on the member berries, which gets kind of frustrating. Even further, I will say some of the member berries moments feel pretty underwhelming. I think most especially, and spoiler warning here, big spoilers for just the next like 20 seconds or so, the 4 Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, do show up at the end, including the ghost of Egon. And while the ghost of Egon is actually kind of touching and sweet, maybe a little bit too much. He's on screen a little bit too much. I would have just like a small moment of him. I did like seeing him, but the rest of the Ghostbusters showing up, while it was nice, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's cool to see them back, they ultimately are just there really as fan service and just to spout off lines of exposition that really kind of distracts from the moment and even kind of takes away from the hero moment of the characters that we've been building up the entire moment. So ultimately, member berries feel superfluous, and while they are nice in like bits and spurts, they ultimately really take away from everything, especially in the final climax of the film, in supposed to be the fan servicey moment of all the Ghostbusters back. It ultimately feels too much, and the only thing that really works for me in those moments is Egon's ghost, which even that stays a little bit too long for me to truly think that it was just the right amount. But what I do like about this movie overall, I think, is the characters of this piece. I think in particular, McKenna Grace is fan-freaking-tastic as Egon's granddaughter. She nails every beat of this movie. Also, for my own heart, she is definitely almost overtly coded as neurodivergent and possibly on the autism spectrum. She has like a lot of jokes at certain points where a character asks, she's like, don't you feel anything? And she says, I don't feel emotion. I don't show emotions in the same way. Inside, I'm vomiting. Or there's one point she says like overstimulation calms me. And so I'm like, oh girl, I totally feel you 100% totally. So she is absolutely fantastic. Finn Wolfhard in this movie, you know, Stranger Things kid, he is a little less necessary for me. He has moments throughout the plot that I deeply enjoy, but I ultimately found him a little bit superfluous, and I wasn't as fully attached to his character as much. There's also a character named Lucky, who is just his love interest, and I found her to be entirely superfluous and deeply frustrating throughout the plot because she's almost there to just be a damsel in distress at some points, as well as to just be, again, the love interest who even at one point, like, she's changing and we get a shot of her changing. I'm like, she's a teenager and she's not serving any plot. Do we really need to do the like male gazy light thing with her? And I just found that to be entirely frustrating. But McKenna Grace is great. There's also a character who's the best friend of McKenna Grace called Podcast, who he is my favorite thing in this movie. Podcast is truly wonderful. I was laughing at him, his energy and just the actor's timing. This kid is so wonderful throughout the piece. I absolutely loved Podcast to a T. Also, Paul Rudd, I think is kind of, again, as I said before, he's like the entry point for older fans of Ghostbusters and older fans of Ghostbusters, sort of like being the teacher character. And when he has moments to shine, I think he is fantastic in this movie as well, and I really enjoyed all of his beats throughout the film. And so on the whole, while I think some characters are a little bit of dead weight, the characters that do need to hit really do hit, especially, again, McKenna Grace, standout character of the movie. I also should say the exposition in this film is a little bit clunky. I think the most egregious example of this is when they actually call Ray from the original Ghostbusters, and he picks up the phone and just kind of like exposits his entire history with Egon between the last movie and this movie, and it kind of comes out of nowhere, and he's kind of spouting off for no real reason, and it's just there to kind of give us exposition as well as a fan servicey moment. And so I thought that there are some moments of clunkiness within this, but it's not overly egregious. But there are a few moments where I'm like, huh. Another good example of this, too, is when they go down into Gozer's cave and there's a list of dates on the wall. And I'm just sort of sitting here thinking, why would Sumerians write dates in, like, our, calendar with the same sort of dates that we would use? Like, I don't think that they were thinking of, like, 2021 as, like, a date way back in whenever these ancient temples supposedly were built. So it's a little bit of a clunky exposition that you're going to have to yada yada here and there. However, this brings me back to another issue with the film I don't really love its pacing. And I kind of want to be careful with how I frame my issue with pacing, because one of the things that this film does is that the first hour of this is fairly slow and laid back. There's actually not an action beat until about halfway or even more than halfway through the film, other than like sort of a quick little intro bit to start us off the film. And I actually really like that. I wish more blockbusters would kind of be a little bit more reticent and don't need to have like an action beat every 20 minutes. It's something that I actually kind of really liked this film for, of taking that risk. But my issue with the pacing of this film is that there are just moments that alternatively feel too fast and too slow. For example, we kind of get to go McKenna Grace, Finn Wolfhard, and the mother character, I forget her name off the top of my head, but the mother, the little family main unit of the movie, we get to know them really quickly. There's just like kind of a scene that kind of gets their dynamic, and then we're off onto this new town where they are in Egon's old home and are getting to know the town and kind of going their own separate ways. And I wish we had gotten a little bit more time to settle into the family dynamic and their interactions with each other, because I didn't really feel like they were a family altogether. Like the kids almost talked to their mother like she was like they were adults as well. And I didn't feel like this movie within the family nailed the like just family dynamic of it. And I didn't really feel a lot of connection between them as a family unit, outside of moments later on in the film that actually I do think really, really work very well. But within the opening of this movie, it just did not work for me, and I thought we could have used more time developing their interactions. Because once they go off on their own and they have their own interactions with other people, I think it's much, much stronger. And they have much more stronger interactions with other characters around the town than they do with actually within their own family unit. And then also the same sort of thing happens later on in the movie, where when we get to the climax of the film, there's some moments that just kind of really quickly speed by. Like, we even have a quick little moment with J.K. Simmons as Shandor, the sort of mastermind of all the Gozer stuff, even from the original Ghostbusters movie, and he's just, like, blink and you'll miss it, he's gone. And it just felt really, really quick in those moments that I'm like, I really could have had a few more seconds here to really sit in the climax of this and, like, feel like oh crap, this is gonna go down here, and it just kind of speeds through to the end. And so I felt that the pacing, especially in the first act and the third act, were just really, really quick. The second act, though, is where this movie truly, truly shines. And I think the second act, where we get to know the characters, they're off kind of having fun, discovering the elements of the Ghostbusters world and getting to learn about all these different things going on, and the major problem and a plot of like Gozer possibly coming back and bringing her back, or them back, I should say. They do make Gozer officially non-binary, which made me very happy. I appreciated that very much so. In those moments is where this film truly shines, and I really loved it, and I felt the heart of the movie in those moments. Like, the moments where this movie just settles into these characters just getting to have fun and explore what it means to be kids in the Ghostbusters world, I thought was really where the heart of this movie was at. And you can really sense that that's where the love and soul from everyone involved, but I think probably especially Jason Reitman, was really channeled. And I just loved all of that. Like, the second act of this movie is just truly amazing, and it's so rare to see a big blockbuster movie like this have the heart that this movie displays in those sequences. And I wish that it had been able to have those moments of heart shine through at the beginning of the film and then towards the climax of the film. And then also, by the way, I should say, without spoiling too much towards the ending of this movie does have that heart as well. I actually got kind of teary-eyed and welled up in the final few moments of this movie, in the last like 10 minutes or so, where there's just some really great payoff and moments that evoke the rest of the franchise, but I think in really tasteful ways, without spoiling too much. And I think the final 10 minutes of this movie also showcases that heart in a really, really wonderful way. And so, to kind of wrap out my thoughts on this movie, I think that this is a much stronger film than the 2016 reboot by far. And I feel like the moments that this film really shines through with its heart, in like the moments with the characters getting to interact with each other, with them finding elements of Ghostbusters past and really like being excited to like learn and discover this world, I think is probably the best parts of this movie and why you would go to see this film. But the moments that don't work are when it gets a little bit too quick, it speeds past moments that I wish it just stayed a little bit longer on, and then also kind of gets a little bit too repetitious of plot beats of Ghostbusters past, rather than kind of standing on its own 2 feet as its own film. Because this movie is, when it's confident in its own identity, it just nails it. Because the fact that this is not even set in a big city, it doesn't like do the big city thing again, and it's set in a small town, is also just really a big swing and a hit for me. And I just wish it had more guts to follow that instinct rather than trying to really shoehorn in these fan servicey moments. And I think when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it doesn't. And so it ultimately makes a mixed bag. But I do think those moments that do hit make this movie worth it and makes me feel positive on it, because it is something that so few blockbusters nowadays have, and that is heart. And I want to see more movies like that have this movie's heart. So that's my review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Ultimately very positive, but I still think it's a mixed bag overall. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like Ghostbusters Afterlife? Did you hate it? I'd love to hear all of that. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews and me being a weird, dork, nerdy person online. And beyond all that, don't forget to, as always, live long and stay sexy.